The drum beats were slow and heavy, each strike echoing like a dying heart. The Alpha King was dead. The grand court of the kingdom was draped in black and silver. Thick curtains covered the tall glass windows, letting only slivers of light touch the polished floor. Nobles and elders filled the hall, their heads bowed, their voices hushed with grief and fear. At the center of the hall lay King Lucas, still and cold, his body resting on a marble slab carved with the royal crest. The scent of burning herbs filled the air. The priestess stood before him, chanting softly, her golden staff glowing faintly in her hand. Every word felt like a final goodbye. Beside the slab stood Queen Lyra, dressed in a flowing black gown. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, but her tears never fell. She pressed a lace cloth to her face as if to hide her sorrow, yet her eyes, behind the veil, were sharp and alive. At her side was Beta Roman, the king's most trusted ally. His expression was calm, too calm, as if death did not surprise him. He stood tall, his hands clasped behind him, watching the ceremony with cold satisfaction. Outside, the wolves howled, a mourning cry for their fallen alpha. The priestess raised her voice. Let his spirit find peace among the moon and stars. But before she could finish, a trembling voice pierced through the hall. He is not dead. The chant stopped. The drums silenced. Every head turned. At the entrance stood a young girl in a faded brown dress, her black hair tangled, her hands held tight by two guards. Her knees shook, but her eyes burned with fire. It was Gwen, the Omega slave. The nobles gasped. Who dares interrupt the burial of the king? One shouted. She must be mad, another hissed. But Gwen's voice grew louder, desperate and unshaken. The Alpha King is alive. Her words rolled through the hall like thunder. Queen Lyra's hand froze midair. Roman's eyes darkened. Murmurs spread among the nobles like ripples on water. Bring her forward, commanded Lady Marin, one of the elder nobles. Let her speak. The guards hesitated, glancing at Roman, but his silent glare told them to obey. Gwen stumbled forward, her bare feet echoing softly against the marble floor. She kept her head low, yet her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the whispers around her. When she reached the center of the court, she lifted her face, and her trembling eyes met the lifeless king. Your Majesty, she whispered, voice breaking. You are not dead. The hall fell silent again, and somewhere beneath the heavy air of death and deceit, fate began to stir. The great hall fell into stunned silence. The echo of Gwen's voice still lingered in the air, heavy and defiant, as dozens of noble eyes turned toward her. The guards who had held her back now looked uncertain, glancing from the trembling slave girl to the motionless body of their Alpha King. Queen Lyra rose slowly from her seat, her golden gown whispering against the marble floor. Her expression was cold and regal, yet her fingers twitched beneath her sleeves. What insolence is this? She said, her voice dripping with venom. Who dares to disturb the king's sacred burial with such madness? Gwen swallowed hard, her knees weak, but she stood tall. It is I, she said, her voice shaking but steady, and I speak only the truth. The nobles murmured among themselves, some scoffing, some whispering that she had lost her mind. Beta Roman stepped forward, towering over her, his dark eyes sharp and cruel. You, he hissed, an Omega slave dares to question the crown? You should be whipped for your tongue, girl. But Gwen didn't flinch. Her hands were trembling, but her gaze never left his face. I dare because I saw what you did, she said, her voice rising, gaining strength from the storm of fear and fury swirling inside her. I saw everything. The hall fell silent again. Even the priestess stopped her chants. The torches crackled softly, casting long shadows across the faces of the stunned nobles. Lady Marin, the eldest among the council, stepped forward from her seat. Her silver hair shimmered in the dim light, her eyes calm but curious. Let the girl speak, she said. If she lies, her life will be forfeit, but if she tells truth, the gods themselves will bear witness. Roman clenched his jaw. My lady, this is absurd. Silence, Lady Marin said firmly. We shall hear her. Gwen's breath hitched. She hadn't expected anyone to defend her. She bowed her head briefly, whispering a quick prayer, and then began to speak. "I was in the servants' corridor 3 nights ago," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I was returning the water jugs when I heard voices from the royal chamber. I knew I should have left, but something in those voices made me stop. I hid behind the tapestry." Her eyes flickered toward Roman and Lyra, who were now watching her with icy glares. "I saw Lord Roman and Queen Lyra standing by the king's table," Gwen continued. "The king was not there. Lord Roman held a small vial filled with black liquid. I saw him hand it to the queen." The crowd gasped. Lyra's lips parted in shock. Then she laughed, the sound brittle and cruel. "Lies. Every word of it." But Gwen pressed on, her voice trembling with passion. "You said the king had ruled long enough," she continued, looking straight at Roman. "You said his time was over. You told her the poison would kill him, that it would be painless but sure. I heard you say it." Roman's face darkened, his fists curling at his sides. "You dare invent stories about me?" "I do not invent them," Gwen cried. "I watched you. I saw you press the vial into her hand, and I saw the queen pass it to a maid named Anira. She told her to mix it into the king's wine. I followed Anira through the corridor. She hid the vial in the pocket of her apron." The nobles began murmuring again. Some shook their heads, but others looked at Roman and Lyra with wary eyes. "I followed her after her duties," Gwen continued, her voice cracking under the weight of memory. "She went to the cellar near the wine racks and hid the vial behind a barrel of ale. I knew then that the king's life was in danger. I knew I had to do something." Gwen's throat tightened and she took a deep breath before continuing. "I am not a healer," she said softly, "but I've learned the power of herbs. I tend to the cattle and learned from the old women in the barns. I once discovered a mixture that can slow a creature's heart so that it appears dead. I tested it on cows, and when they seemed gone, I used the antidote to bring them back." Gasps echoed around the hall. Lady Marin leaned forward, listening intently. "So," Gwen said, her voice quivering, "I made another of those mixtures. I had it hidden in a small jar, one I kept for myself. I waited until Anira was sweeping the corridor. I told her the queen had called her. While she was gone, I found where she hid the potion and replaced it with mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "I did it to save the king's life. I knew they would think their plan succeeded, but it would only make his breathing slow until it seemed he was gone. I thought I could bring him back later when they believed they had won." For a long, stunned moment, no one spoke. The words hung heavy in the air, as though the kingdom itself was deciding whether to believe her. Then Roman laughed, a low, dangerous sound. "A fine story," he sneered. "So this girl admits she tampered with royal affairs, handled forbidden substances, and dared to touch what was meant for the king. She confesses her crime and still wants mercy?" He turned to the nobles. "She deserves the sword." Several of the nobles murmured in agreement, but Lady Marin raised her hand again. "Enough," she thundered. "If she speaks truth, then the moon goddess will show it. If she lies, she will die here today. But we must be certain. Let her prove her claim." Roman's face twisted with anger. "You would risk the court's dignity for the word of a slave." "I would risk it," Lady Marin said calmly, "for the truth." All eyes turned to Gwen. Her body trembled, her palms slick with sweat. The guard stepped aside at Lady Marin's gesture, and Gwen walked forward slowly, each step echoing through the vast hall. She climbed the dais and stood before the slab where King Lucas lay, motionless and pale, the scent of incense heavy around him. Her heart thundered in her chest. She could feel the eyes of everyone, nobles, guards, the priestess, Roman, Lyra, all fixed upon her trembling hands. She bent down beside the king, her voice barely a whisper. "Please," she murmured, "let this work again." She reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small pouch of crushed herbs, green and sharp-smelling, the same mixture she had used on the cows. She poured a pinch into her palm, crushed it gently between her fingers, and lifted it to the king's nose. The hall held its breath. The sharp, bitter scent of the herbs filled the air. Seconds passed. Nothing happened. Gwen's heart sank. "She lies," Lyra shouted, stepping forward. "End this mockery. She seeks to deceive the court." But Lady Maren raised her hand once more. "Wait." Another second passed. Then another. Gwen shut her eyes and whispered a silent prayer. "Please, my king. Please." A faint sound broke the silence. A cough. Gasps erupted across the hall as the king's fingers twitched, his chest rising ever so slightly. Then he sneezed. The room erupted into chaos. The nobles shouted in disbelief. The priestess dropped her staff, and the guards stumbled backward. Queen Lyra's face drained of color. King Lucas's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. He tried to speak, but only a faint whisper came out. The grand hall trembled with noise and disbelief. The nobles surged from their seats, shouting, pointing, arguing. The Alpha King, who only moments ago lay as pale as stone, was now sitting up, his eyes blinking against the torchlight. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uncertain breaths. The priestess fell to her knees, murmuring frantic prayers. Some nobles cried that it was a miracle. Others whispered of dark sorcery. Queen Lyra stood frozen beside the dais, her lips parted in horror. She had not expected to see him breathe again. The hand that had moments before gripped Roman's sleeve now trembled violently at her side. King Lucas looked around the hall, confused. His eyes swept across faces he could not recognize, landing briefly on Gwen, kneeling before him with tears still glistening on her cheeks. His brows furrowed. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse, weak. What has happened?" No one dared answer. The nobles exchanged uncertain glances. Roman stepped forward immediately, his face twisted into an expression of false relief. "My king," he said quickly, kneeling beside him. "You were gravely ill, and this girl, this Omega slave, has done something unnatural to your body. She used witchcraft, my lord. She bewitched you." A wave of gasps swept through the hall. Gwen's joy froze in her chest. "That's a lie," she cried, springing to her feet. "I did nothing of the sort. I saved his life when all of you were ready to bury him." Roman's glare was sharp as a blade. "Silence. You dare raise your voice before your alpha? Look at him. His mind is clouded, his spirit shaken. Tell me, what other power but witchcraft could do this?" The nobles murmured again. Some nodded. Some stepped back from Gwen as though she carried plague. Lyra finally found her voice. "Yes," she shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Gwen. "She is a deceiver. She plotted against the king, perhaps even poisoned him, and now pretends to save him to win his favor." "That is not true," Gwen cried, but her voice was drowned by a swell of fearful whispers. "She bewitched his body. She must have known the dark arts." Gwen's hands trembled. Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. She turned desperately toward Lady Maren, her last hope. "My lady, please. If you bring the maid Anira, she will tell the truth. She's the one they gave the poison to. She knows everything." Lady Maren narrowed her gaze. "You say this maid, Anira, was involved?" "Yes," Gwen said quickly. "The queen gave her the vial. She must have hidden herself now that the truth is coming out." Lyra let out a cold laugh. "Convenient. The maid vanishes, and the only witness to your supposed heroism cannot be found." "Bring all the maids before us," Lady Maren commanded, her tone sharp and unwavering. "At once." 2 guards hurried from the hall. The room buzzed with uneasy whispers as everyone waited. Gwen's knees threatened to give way beneath her. She looked at King Lucas again. His eyes were still confused, as though lost in fog. He stared at her for a long moment, his lips parting slightly but said nothing. Roman leaned close to the king. "My king," he said in a soft, persuasive tone. "The girl is dangerous. Let us end this madness before she brings ruin to your court." Lucas blinked slowly, struggling to recall his last memory. "Dangerous?" he muttered. She said she saved me." Roman forced a chuckle. "The devil saves no one, my king. She deceives you." The heavy doors opened again. The guards marched in, followed by a line of nervous maids. Their heads were bowed, their hands trembling. Among them were cooks, laundresses, and chambermaids, all wearing the same fear in their eyes. "Raise your heads," Lady Marin said. "One of you is named Anira. Step forward." The maids exchanged frightened glances, but no one moved. "Step forward," Lady Marin thundered. Still silence. Roman smirked. "See? This Anira does not exist. The girl weeps for her own lies." Gwen's stomach turned to ice. She looked at each maid's face, searching for the one she had seen in the corridor, the nervous girl with a scar above her eyebrow. But she was not there. "She's lying," Lyra hissed. "This Omega created stories to gain attention." "I am not lying," Gwen shouted, her voice breaking. "She was here. She served in the Queen's chambers." Lady Marin's brow furrowed. "Captain," she ordered the guard, "check the servant quarters. Find this maid." The guard saluted and left again. Roman crossed his arms and turned to the court. "While we waste time chasing ghosts, a real danger stands among us. You all saw her touch the king. You all saw the unnatural way he woke. You think this was healing?" He turned to the crowd, his voice rising with practiced passion. "This was witchcraft. She tampered with the royal body. She played with death." The words sank like poison into the crowd. Nobles exchanged worried looks. Some began to murmur prayers under their breath. Gwen shook her head desperately. "I only wanted to save him." Roman's gaze hardened. "Save him?" He pointed toward the dais. "You mean kill him? Then revive him at your command so he would be yours to control?" The crowd gasped again. Lyra's eyes glistened as she clutched her chest in mock sorrow. "It's true," she whispered. "She has always looked at him with hunger. I've seen her in the corridors watching the king. She dreamed of rising above her place." Gwen's face burned. "That's not true. But her words were drowned in shouts of outrage. "Traitor! Witch! She defiled the king's body." Lady Marin slammed her staff on the floor. "Enough," she cried, her voice cutting through the noise. "The king himself must decide." All eyes turned toward Lucas. The hall grew still. The Alpha King looked from Gwen to Roman, then to Lyra. Confusion clouded his face. I do not remember," he said slowly. Roman's face twisted in fury. "Enough of this madness, guards." But before he could finish, the doors burst open again. The captain of the guards returned, alone. His face was pale. "Well?" Lady Marin demanded. "Did you find her?" The captain bowed his head. "No, my lady. The maid named Anira is gone. Her supposed quarters are empty. It looks like she doesn't exist." A cold hush swept through the hall. Lyra clasped her hands dramatically. "You see? Even her imaginary witness is nowhere to be found." Roman turned to the crowd. "There is your answer. The girl conspired to harm the king and now invents tales to hide her guilt. Her words are poison, her touch forbidden." Lady Marin looked torn. "Gwen, is there anything else you can prove?" Tears welled in Gwen's eyes. She shook her head helplessly. "No, only the truth of what I saw." Gwen stood in the middle of the marble floor. Her head was lowered, her hair shadowing her tear-streaked face. The same nobles who had cheered her name only hours ago now avoided her eyes, whispering to one another as if she carried some invisible plague. Queen Lyra sat on the golden throne beside the still empty king's seat, her veil drawn low. Beta Roman stood near her, his posture proud, his eyes gleaming with victory. "She must answer for what she's done," Roman said, his voice loud enough to silence the room. "We allowed this slave to touch our king's body, and now he seems not to remember anything. What proof do we have that she did not cause this?" Lady Marin's old voice rose softly. "She saved him. You saw him alive." Roman turned sharply. "And what of the maid she claimed carried the poison? Where is this mysterious servant now?" The nobles began to murmur. Heads turned, glances darted across the hall. The maid had vanished. No one had seen her. Roman smiled coldly. "Convenient, isn't it? The one person who could support her story is nowhere to be found. Tell me, Gwen, where is this maid of yours?" Gwen's voice broke as she spoke. I don't know. She was here. I saw her hide the vial in her apron. Roman's tone sharpened. Enough lies. You expect us to believe a low-born Omega followed a palace maid, spied on royal business, and somehow replaced a deadly poison with her own concoction? Do you take the council for fools? I am telling the truth, Gwen cried. Her hands trembled as she stepped forward. The Queen and Roman plotted it together. I saw them with my own eyes. Murmurs rippled through the court. Queen Lyra's face went pale, then quickly twisted into wounded outrage. You dare accuse me, she hissed. You, a slave, who should not even lift your eyes to mine. I saw you, Gwen cried again. You gave the vial to the maid, and Beta Roman said the king would be gone by sunrise. I couldn't let it happen. The court erupted in noise. Some nobles shouted for silence, others for her punishment. Roman raised his hand. Listen to her words. See how madness takes her. She weaves a story that paints her as a savior and us as villains. Ask yourselves, why? Why would a slave risk her life to save a king who enslaved her mother unless she had her own plan? He let the silence stretch before continuing. She hated the king for what he did to her family. This is revenge. She wanted to bring chaos to the court, to turn us against each other, and when her plan failed, she cried to win sympathy. Gwen shook her head violently, tears flying from her lashes. No, I would never harm the king. He doesn't deserve. She stopped herself, her throat tightening around the words she couldn't say. Lady Marin's staff struck the floor. Enough. The girl may be guilty of overstepping, but she speaks with conviction. If she wished the king dead, why save him at all? Roman's smile didn't fade. Perhaps she wished him alive, so she could claim power through pity. You see, Lady Marin, some slaves dream higher than their station. Laughter rose among the courtiers, cruel, mocking laughter. Gwen's face burned with shame, but she lifted her chin. You twist everything, she whispered. You fear the truth. Roman ignored her. Let the council decide. The maid is gone. There is no proof but the words of a desperate Omega, and the king, our only witness, cannot remember. Queen Lyra turned to the nobles, tears finally falling down her cheeks. Please, she said softly, her voice quivering. My husband's mind is dazed while lies poison this hall. I beg the council to act before this witch brings more ruin upon us. The hall fell silent. One by one, the nobles lowered their heads in agreement. Some looked uncertain, but none dared defy the queen and her beta. Finally, Lady Marin spoke, her voice weary. By the laws of the crown, a crime against the Alpha King is treason. The nobles nodded gravely. The punishment is death, by the third dawn. Gwen's knees gave way. No, she whispered. Please, I didn't. Guards seized her arms and began dragging her toward the doors. She kicked weakly, sobbing, her cries echoing off the stone walls. Please, I saved him. Ask him when he remembers. Please. But no one listened. As the heavy doors closed behind her, Roman turned to the queen, his voice low and pleased. By sunrise on the third day, the threat is gone. You have nothing to fear. Lyra's lips curved into a faint, trembling smile. Let her die for her insolence. The dungeon smelled of damp stone and rust. Gwen sat on the cold floor. Beside her, her mother Claudia wept softly. The torchlight flickered over her lined face and graying hair. Oh, my child, Claudia whispered. Why did you do this? I told you never to meddle in royal affairs. They will kill us both now. Why didn't you listen? Gwen stared at the ground, her throat too tight to speak. You could have stayed in the shadows, her mother continued between sobs. We could have lived quietly in the servants' quarters. Why did you speak? Why risk everything? Gwen's eyes filled again. She drew her knees close and whispered, Because I couldn't let him die. Her mother blinked at her through tears. Why? But Gwen said no more. She turned away, her heart aching with the truth she could never confess, that somewhere between watching him from afar and defying the world to save him, she had fallen in love with her captor. The cell grew silent, save for the steady dripping of water. Above them, the palace bells tolled for nightfall. King Lucas lay motionless on his bed, his breath shallow but steady. The golden curtain swayed softly with the morning breeze, letting thin strips of sunlight fall across his face. His eyes were open now, calm and cold, though he made sure to keep them half-lidded, pretending to drift in and out of consciousness. Every heartbeat pulled back a fragment of memory. The taste of bitter wine, the Queen's sharp perfume, Roman's faint smile before darkness swallowed everything. He remembered. He remembered enough to know that death had come close. Too close. But as he lay still beneath the silken sheets, he understood one thing clearly. If they believed he remembered nothing, he would live long enough to uncover their secret. Lucas, Queen Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts. She sat by his side, her hand brushing gently across his forehead. My love, you're awake. Thank the moon goddess. Her tone trembled with tenderness, but her eyes flickered too quickly, like someone afraid of being caught. Lucas didn't respond. He turned his gaze weakly toward her, his expression blank. Lyra, he murmured, his voice hoarse. What happened? To me. Lyra hesitated, then turned her face away as if in pain. You were poisoned, my king, she whispered, but do not worry. The culprit has been found. Justice will be served. Poisoned, he echoed faintly. His chest rose in a slow, shaky breath. His head pounded, memories clawing at the edge of his mind. A flash of a trembling voice, pleading, soft, desperate. Wake up, my king, please wake up. He frowned. Who saved me? Before Lyra could answer, the chamber doors creaked open and Beta Roman entered, dressed in his dark robes, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. My king, he said with a respectful bow, the moon goddess have spared your life, but we have found the traitor responsible for your near death. Lucas struggled to sit up. Who? Roman's voice was steady. A slave girl named Gwen. She mixed your drink with poison. She confessed before the council. The Queen leaned closer, brushing his hair tenderly. You don't have to worry about anything. Just rest and heal. Justice will be done. But Lucas wasn't listening. Behind their words he could hear deceit breathing, soft, serpentine, and familiar. He saw the faint tremor in Lyra's hands and the careful calmness in Roman's tone. They were too polished, too certain. They were lying. He remembered flashes now, voices echoing through the darkness of his mind, whispers of betrayal, and then that voice. Wake up, my king, please wake up. The memory made his chest ache. The voice wasn't harsh or cold. It was desperate, trembling with tears and courage. Whoever she was, she hadn't wanted him dead. She had saved him, but now they wanted her dead. Lucas clenched his fist beneath the sheets, forcing his breathing to stay slow, his eyes dull. And this girl? Where is she now? In the dungeon, Roman replied quickly. She will hang in 3 days. It's the only way to cleanse the court of treason. The king turned his head away, hiding the flicker of fury in his gaze. I see. Lyra smiled faintly and leaned closer, pressing her lips against his forehead. You're safe now, my king. That's all that matters. He said nothing, but as they left the room, Lucas slowly opened his eyes fully, his mind sharpening like a blade. He whispered into the empty chamber. You tried to kill me. Both of you. Then his voice softened. And you, whoever you are, you saved me. He pushed himself up slightly, pain shooting through his body, but his resolve only deepened. He would not rest until he found the truth, until he saw the girl whose courage had brought him back from the edge of death. Outside his chamber, Queen Lyra's calm mask cracked for a moment. He looked at me differently, she hissed to Roman, as if he knew. Roman's jaw tightened. If he remembers, we'll know soon enough. Until then, the slave girl must die. Her silence will be our safety. But inside the king's heart, a storm had begun to rise, quiet, patient, and deadly. The morning sun rose over the palace like a cruel witness. Its light spilled across the courtyard where the people of the kingdom had gathered, nobles in silk, soldiers in armor, and servants in rags, all drawn by the same grim spectacle. The execution slab stood at the center of the marble square, its surface dark and cold, stained by the memory of countless punishments past. Two figures knelt before it. Gwen and her mother, Claudia. Their hands were bound in iron chains that clinked softly whenever they moved. A hush fell over the crowd as the guards pushed them forward. Gwen's hair, tangled and dusty, fell across her face, but she did not weep. Her eyes, though red from sleepless nights, burned with quiet defiance. Beside her, her mother trembled, whispering prayers under her breath, her tears falling freely to the ground. Lady Marin, the noblewoman who had once defended Gwen, stood before the crowd, holding the scroll that contained the final judgment. Her voice shook as she began to read. Gwen, daughter of Claudia, servant of the royal court, is hereby found guilty of witchcraft, false accusation against the crown, and the spreading of deceit among the noble council. A murmur swept through the crowd. Some nodded, others frowned in silence. Lady Marin's lips trembled as she continued. By the order of the Alpha King's council, the sentence is death by beheading. The air turned heavy. Gwen closed her eyes, her lips moving in silent prayer. If this is how it ends, she thought, then let it end with peace. But deep within her, something refused to break. Claudia's voice rose suddenly, breaking through the silence. Please, spare my child. She's innocent. The crowd turned, their faces hard. The executioner, a tall man in black armor, took a step forward. On your knees, he commanded. Gwen's heart raced, but she did not beg. Instead, she lifted her head, her eyes scanning the crowd one last time, searching for a face she could trust. But all she saw were blank stares and whispers. Then, as the executioner raised his blade high, a sound thundered through the courtyard. Stop! The voice cut through the air like lightning. The soldiers froze. The crowd gasped. Heads turned toward the grand staircase that led down from the palace balcony. There stood Alpha King Lucas. He was dressed in deep crimson robes, the royal crest shining on his chest, his dark hair pulled back from his face. But his eyes were alive again, burning with fury and truth. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-flight. The executioner lowered his blade instantly and fell to his knees. My king. Lucas's gaze swept the courtyard, sharp and unyielding. Release them, now, he barked, his voice echoing against the palace walls. The guards hesitated, unsure what to do. Then the king descended the marble steps, each step filled with controlled rage. The crowd parted before him like waves before a storm. When he reached the center, he stopped before Gwen and her mother. For a moment, his stern face softened. He knelt slightly, his eyes meeting Gwen's. She stared up at him, disbelief flooding her face. My king, I remember everything, Lucas said quietly. You saved my life. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Queen Lyra, who stood on the balcony above, went pale. Roman's fists clenched at his side. Lucas rose to his full height, turning toward the soldiers. Seize them, he commanded, his voice steady and deadly calm. Who, my king? A guard stammered. Queen Lyra and Beta Roman. The courtyard erupted in shock. The nobles whispered in disbelief as guards began to move. Lyra's eyes widened in fury. How dare you, Lucas? You're confused. You don't know what you're saying. But the king's glare silenced her. Enough lies, he said, his tone low but dangerous. You poisoned me, and when this brave girl exposed you, you tried to silence her. Roman drew his sword, his voice cold. You have no proof. Lucas took a step closer, his hand resting on the hilt of his own blade. I have memory, Roman. Guards swarmed around them, swords drawn. Lyra tried to flee, but soldiers blocked her path. Roman swung his weapon, but within seconds he was disarmed, pinned to the ground. The crowd cheered, hesitantly at first, then louder, as realization dawned. Gwen's eyes filled with tears she had held back for too long. Claudia sobbed into her daughter's shoulder, whispering thanks to the heavens. King Lucas turned to Lady Marin. See that these two are taken to the royal dungeon. Their trial will be held at dawn. As you command, my king, Marin replied, her voice trembling with both relief and awe. Lucas turned back to Gwen. The crowd's cheers faded to silence again as he stepped closer. You risked your life to save mine, he said quietly. Tell me, why? Gwen hesitated, her throat tight. Because I couldn't let you die, she whispered. Not when I knew the truth. Their eyes met, his full of gratitude and sorrow, hers filled with the fragile strength of a heart that had already accepted death. Lucas looked away, his jaw tightening. No one in this kingdom will ever harm you again, he declared. You and your mother are free. The royal court had never been this silent. The nobles, elders, and warriors filled the grand hall, their faces pale, their hearts heavy. The banners that hung from the walls swayed faintly in the cool morning air, and the scent of burning incense filled the room like a shroud. At the center stood King Lucas, alive, strong, and commanding. His eyes were hard, his presence overwhelming. Queen Lyra and Beta Roman knelt before him in chains, their royal robes stripped away. Gone were the smiles that once charmed the court. Gone was the arrogance that had ruled behind his back. Now they were nothing but traitors waiting for judgment. Lucas took a slow breath and began. You all gathered 3 nights ago to bury me, he said, his voice echoing through the hall. You mourned your Alpha King. You watched me laid upon the slab, motionless, breathless, and you wept. But none of you asked why your king, who was in perfect health, would fall dead so suddenly. A murmur rippled through the court. Some nobles exchanged guilty glances, others bowed their heads in shame. Lucas's voice grew stronger. That night, I drank from a golden cup brought to me by a servant girl. The wine was sweet, too sweet, and before I could question it, my strength left me. Gasps filled the room. Lyra's eyes darted toward Roman, her lips trembling. Lucas turned toward her, his expression unreadable. As I fell, he continued, I heard laughter. I could not move, but I could hear. I heard you, Lyra, and you, Roman. I heard your voices whispering above me. You thought I was gone. The court froze. Even the torches on the walls seemed to burn quieter. Lucas's tone dropped cold and sharp. I remember your words. Roman said he had waited too long for that moment. And Lyra. His eyes hardened. You said you never loved me, that you only wanted the crown. You said the king's blood would finally give you freedom. He stiffened. I watched my Luna kiss my Beta as my eyes drifted into sleep. Murmurs filled the hall, people whispering in disbelief. Lyra's breath caught. She looked away, her shoulders shaking. Roman sneered, struggling against his chains. He lies. He's delusional from poison. He doesn't know what he's saying. But before anyone could respond, Lyra broke. Enough, she cried, her voice cracking through the silence. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she turned to Lucas. It's true. It's all true. The crowd erupted into gasps and shouts. Some nobles covered their mouths. Others recoiled in horror. Lyra fell to her knees, sobbing. I did it. We both did. I was tired of being nothing more than your queen in name while you ruled everything. I wanted power, real power. Roman promised me that once you were gone, we'd share the throne. Roman's eyes widened in fury. You fool, he hissed. You'll damn us both. But it was too late. The confession echoed through every corner of the court. Lucas's face was still, but his eyes burned with restrained pain. You both swore oaths before this very court to protect the crown, he said softly, and yet you tried to destroy it. He turned to the guards. By the laws of the Alpha Kingdom, betrayal against the crown is punishable by death. No. Lucas, please, Lyra screamed, crawling forward. I loved you once, please don't do this. You loved power, he said coldly. Not me. The guards seized Roman and Lyra, dragging them toward the courtyard. The sound of their cries filled the hall, echoing like ghosts. The nobles watched in stunned silence, some crossing themselves, others whispering prayers. Moments later, the heavy doors opened again. The guards returned, without Lyra and Roman. The air was thick with finality. Lucas turned back to his court. Let this be a warning, he said, his tone grave. Loyalty to the crown is sacred. Betrayal will always be answered with justice. The nobles bowed deeply, murmuring their obedience. Then the king's gaze softened. His eyes found Gwen, standing quietly at the edge of the hall beside her mother. The court parted for her as she stepped forward, her face unsure, her hands trembling. Lucas descended the dais and stopped before her. The hall watched in utter silence. "You," he said softly, his voice almost breaking. "You saved me when everyone else wanted me dead." Gwen lowered her head, her heart pounding. "I only did what was right, my king." His hand lifted, fingers brushing gently against her chin, tilting her face upward. "You risked your life for a man who once enslaved your mother." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she couldn't speak. For the first time, the Alpha King's gaze was not stern, not cold, but filled with warmth and something deeper, something neither of them could name. "I owe you more than life," he said. "You showed me that truth can come even from the humblest soul." The nobles watched, whispering among themselves. Some frowned, others smiled faintly, sensing something different in their king, something human. Lucas turned to Lady Marin. "See that Gwen and her mother are given chambers in the palace. From this day forth, they are no longer slaves." Gasps echoed once more, but the king didn't care. As Gwen and her mother were led away, Lucas watched her go, his hand still tingling from the warmth of her skin. For the first time since his near death, peace touched his heart. The palace felt different. The air no longer carried the heavy silence of fear that once ruled the halls. For the first time, Gwen walked with freedom. She wore a simple white gown given to her by the court lady, though she still kept her head bowed in humility. Her mother, Claudia, had been moved to a small but clean chamber near the servants' quarters, a room with its own window, bed, and food brought daily. For a woman who had lived her whole life in captivity, it was more than comfort. Yet for Gwen, freedom didn't feel real. Every step she took inside the vast marble corridors reminded her that she didn't belong. Every glance from a noble or guard reminded her that she was still, in their eyes, a slave who got lucky. That morning, as she tended to her mother's herbs by the window, a knock sounded at the door. A royal guard stood outside, his armor gleaming. "The king requests your presence in the royal garden," he announced. Gwen froze, her heart leaping. "Mimi?" "Yes," the guard said firmly. "Now." When she reached the royal garden, the air was soft and fragrant. The garden was alive with blossoms, roses, jasmine, and lilies swaying beneath the gentle wind. Sunlight streamed through the branches, scattering golden patches over the marble pathway. King Lucas stood beside a fountain carved in the shape of two wolves. He was dressed simply, without his crown, just a black tunic that clung to his broad shoulders. He looked nothing like the fierce ruler from the throne room. Here, he looked human. Gwen hesitated several steps away, lowering her gaze. "You sent for me, my king?" Lucas turned. When his eyes met hers, the edge in his voice softened instantly. "You don't have to bow every time you speak to me, Gwen." It's what I was taught," she stammered. He smiled faintly. "Then let me unteach you." She blinked, unsure if she was allowed to smile back. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her gown. I wanted to thank you, my king, for freeing my mother and I. You didn't have to." "I did," he said, walking closer. "Because you did what no one else dared to. You saved me when the people I trusted most tried to kill me." Gwen's eyes flickered up to his, then away again. "I only did what was right." Lucas studied her quietly. The girl before him was unlike anyone he had known. She stood tall despite her nervousness. Her words carried thought, yet she never boasted. Her humility was disarming. "I've been told," he said after a pause, "that you know herbs better than most healers in my kingdom." Gwen nodded slowly. "Yes, my king. My mother worked in the healer's tent before she became a slave. I learned by watching her. Later, I began to study plants myself, their scents, their effects. I can tell which ones heal and which ones harm." He raised an eyebrow. "So that's how you knew what to do that day?" "Yes." Her voice softened. "The potion that slowed your breathing. I created it from wild root, dusk flower, and moonleaf. It makes the body sleep deeply, but keeps the heart steady. I had tried it on animals before. Lucas chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. A slave girl making royal medicine. She frowned slightly. I didn't mean to disobey the laws of the court, my king. I only wanted to learn. No, he said gently. Don't apologize for being curious. Knowledge is not rebellion, Gwen, it's strength. Her breath caught at the sound of her name on his lips. She had heard him speak countless names before, commanding, dismissive, cold. But now when he said hers, it sounded almost kind. Encouraged, she continued, her voice trembling slightly. I read too. The healers sometimes left old scrolls behind. I taught myself. I know some history, a little politics, how the council decisions affect the packs. Lucas turned to her fully now, his eyes narrowing with intrigue. You read? She nodded quickly. I know I'm not supposed to, but words are powerful, my king. They can open the mind in ways no one expects. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he laughed quietly, shaking his head in disbelief. You're remarkable, Gwen. You were born in chains, yet you see clearer than those who sit in silk robes. Her cheeks flushed pink. I don't know about that, my king. I never wanted to die ignorant. The words struck him deeply. He looked at her, not as a slave, not as a servant, but as a soul, a brave, wise soul hidden beneath chains. They stood in silence for a moment, the sound of the fountain filling the air. The sunlight caught in Gwen's hair, and Lucas found himself staring a little too long. He cleared his throat. You've spent your life serving others. Perhaps it's time you start living for yourself. Her lips parted slightly, confusion in her gaze. I don't understand. He took a step closer, his voice lower now. I want you to stay in the palace, not as a servant, as my advisor on healing and herbs. You've proven your knowledge is valuable. Her eyes widened. Advisor? Me? He smiled faintly. Yes. You've already saved my life once. I think I can trust your judgment again. For a moment, she forgot to breathe. The king's words washed over her like a dream. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, he said softly. Her heart fluttered. Yes, my king. Lucas nodded, his eyes lingering on her face. Then it settled. From this day forth, Gwen, you'll serve by my side, not as a slave, but as one who saved her king. As she bowed her head again, hiding her trembling smile, Lucas found himself unable to look away. There was something in her, something pure, something rare, that stirred a feeling he hadn't felt in years. And as Gwen walked away from the garden that day, her heart beating fast, she realized something too. She had entered the king's world not as a servant anymore, but as someone he saw, someone who mattered. Weeks passed quietly after the storm that shook the kingdom. The court was still recovering from the betrayal of Lyra and Roman, and though peace had returned to the palace, something new had begun to grow. Something delicate, unspoken, yet alive. Every afternoon, King Lucas would stroll through the royal garden and Gwen would somehow always be there. At first, she came only to tend to the healing herbs. But soon, her hands moved slower, and her gaze lingered longer when she felt his eyes on her. The once broken king and the humble slave found in each other an odd kind of solace, one that neither dared to name. They would talk for hours under the shade of the old willow. Lucas would ask about her past, how she learned to read, why she loved herbs so much, why she had risked her life to save him. Gwen would answer shyly, her voice soft like the rustling leaves. Because no one deserves to die without truth, she would say, and because... She'd stop, her courage failing her, because I couldn't bear to see you go. Lucas studied her like one studies the stars, quietly, reverently, knowing he should not reach out but unable to look away. There was something about her that felt pure, untouched by greed or pride. Her honesty disarmed him. Her laughter, rare as it was, felt like a balm on his weary soul. When he spoke of the burdens of the throne, Gwen listened, her eyes gentle yet strong. She didn't flatter him like the nobles did. She spoke to him like a man, not a crown. Power, she said one evening, is only beautiful when used to protect, not to control. Those words stayed with him long after she had left, but their closeness did not go unnoticed. Servants whispered. Some nobles began to gossip, calling her the king's pet, the slave who ensnared the crown. Gwen tried to stay away, but Lucas kept summoning her, his excuses becoming softer each time. To discuss herbs, or to walk in the sun. One night, Claudia waited up for her daughter, worry etched across her tired face. When Gwen entered, her cheeks flushed from the garden air, Claudia spoke gently but firmly. "Child," she said, her voice trembling, "do you know what happens when the moon falls in love with the sun? She disappears. You are that moon, Gwen. He may see you now, but the world will not let you shine beside him." Gwen looked away, her throat tight. "I know, Mama, but when I'm with him, I forget I'm a slave." Claudia took her hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "That is the danger. You forget, but the world will not." The next day, Lucas waited in the garden again, but Gwen didn't come. For hours he sat beneath the willow, staring at the herbs she once tended. Something inside him felt hollow. For the first time since his revival, he realized he was lonely again. That night, as the wind whispered through the palace walls, he made a silent vow. He would not let the world decide who was worthy of his heart. Not this time. The council chamber buzzed with tension that morning. The nobles, dressed in gold-trimmed robes, whispered among themselves, their voices laced with disdain and disbelief. At the far end of the long marble table sat King Lucas, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting his face with shards of crimson and blue, like a man torn between peace and battle. The rumor had spread across the kingdom like wildfire. The king had fallen for a slave. And not just any slave, but the very Omega girl who once defied the crown before all the nobles. To the council, it was humiliation. To Lucas, it was truth. "Your Majesty," Lord Draven, the council's most rigid member, began, his tone dripping with controlled anger. "It has come to our attention that you've been spending inappropriate amounts of time with that girl, Gwen." A murmur of agreement followed. "A slave in the royal gardens," one noble spat. "A slave advising the king on herb matters," another added. "This is an insult to the crown." Lucas sat back, his eyes steady. "That girl," he said calmly, "is the reason you still have a king sitting before you today. Or have you all forgotten whose poison nearly destroyed this throne?" Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Lady Marin cleared her throat softly. "Alpha King speaks the truth," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We owe our peace, and his life, to Gwen's courage. Without her, this council would be led by traitors." But Lord Draven slammed his fist on the table. "Courage does not erase bloodline. She is a lowborn. The law forbids a commoner, let alone a slave, from sharing the king's table, let alone his heart. If word spreads further, the nobles will turn against you. The people will mock the crown." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Then let them mock me for truth rather than respect me for deceit," he said. "I will not cast away loyalty because it was born in chains." The nobles erupted in outrage. Some stood, demanding he reconsider. One even shouted, "You must take a noble bride, Your Majesty, for the sake of the throne." Lucas rose from his seat, his voice thundering across the hall. "The throne stands not on noble blood, but on justice. And if justice offends you, then you are not worthy of this court." The room went silent. The fire in his eyes dared anyone to speak again. No one did. After the council dispersed in uneasy silence, Lucas remained alone, staring at the royal seal on the table. The weight of tradition pressed down on him, but his heart had already chosen rebellion. Later that evening, Gwen was summoned to the throne room. She entered hesitantly, her head bowed. When she saw his face, tired but soft, she knelt. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "please, stop defending me. They hate me. I can't be the reason they turn against you." He stepped closer. You are not the reason for their anger. Their pride is. You gave me life, Gwen. You opened my eyes to truth. How can I turn away from that? Tears welled in her eyes. But I am a slave. My presence brings you shame. Lucas reached down and lifted her chin gently. No, Gwen. You might have been born a slave, but in my eyes you are worth a seat at the noble's table. Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not as a servant, not as a subject, but as an equal. But deep inside, she feared what his boldness would cost. The court could not forgive love that crossed such boundaries, and though her heart longed to believe him, a voice whispered from the shadows of her soul, "The world will not let this last." The night was drenched in silver light. The moon hung low over the palace gardens, bathing the flowers in a glow that made them look almost otherworldly. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lilies and dew through the air, rustling the leaves of the great willow. Their willow. It was there that Gwen stood alone, her heart heavy, her hands trembling, as she stared at the reflection of the moon in the small pond before her. She had tried to stay away. She had told herself that her heart had no right to feel what it did, that the king's kindness was just gratitude, nothing more. Yet each time she heard his voice echoing down the corridors, her heart betrayed her. Each time his eyes found hers across the great hall, the world seemed to stop. But now, as tears slipped down her cheeks, she whispered to the night, "It's wrong. I can't love him. I shouldn't." "Then why does it hurt so much to say it?" came a voice behind her. Gwen turned sharply, startled. King Lucas stood a few steps away, dressed simply in a loose tunic, no crown, no guards, just a man. His face was half lit by the moon, his expression soft yet troubled. He had been searching for her for hours. When he saw her tears, something in him broke. "Why are you crying?" he asked gently, stepping closer. She shook her head quickly, wiping her face. "It's nothing, Your Majesty. Please go back inside. You shouldn't be seen here with me." "Don't call me that," he said, his voice low. "Not when we're alone." She froze. The tenderness in his tone made her heart race. He moved closer, slowly, as if afraid she would disappear if he moved too fast. "Since that day," he continued softly, "since you shouted in the hall to save me, I felt alive again. I was lost, Gwen, betrayed by those I trusted most. But when I opened my eyes, it was your voice I heard. Your courage reminded me what truth feels like." Her lips parted, but no words came. The tears returned, falling faster now. "You can't say these things," she whispered. "You're the king, and you're the woman who saved me." He interrupted gently. She shook her head fiercely. "No, I'm a slave. I was born in chains. Loving you would be a crime, and I can't." Before she could finish, he took her hands in his. His palms were warm, steady. "Then I will make you everything but a slave," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "If the world denies your worth, I will rewrite the world. I will not lose you to fear." Her breath caught. The walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. For the first time, she allowed herself to look at him, not as her king, but as the man whose heart mirrored her own. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling. He stepped even closer until the space between them vanished. "Say my name again," he murmured. "Lucas." That was all it took. His lips found hers, softly at first, then with a desperate hunger neither could hold back. It was not the kiss of a king and a servant. It was the meeting of two souls who had been running from the same truth. The world melted away. When they finally broke apart, Gwen's heart was racing, her face flushed. "This will destroy us," she breathed. "Then let it," he said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I would rather be ruined with you than rule without you." The moon watched silently as they held each other beneath the willow, their hearts no longer bound by rank or fear. For that one night, they were not king and slave. They were just two wounded souls who had found healing in each other's arms. The palace had begun to breathe again. Laughter had slowly returned to its halls, and for the first time in months, King Lucas walked with light in his step. His days were filled with purpose, his nights with peace. And always, somewhere close by, was Gwen. Their love was a quiet thing, hidden from the public eye but felt in every glance, every stolen smile, every whispered word in the moonlit garden. Even Claudia, though afraid, could not deny the way her daughter glowed whenever the king's name was mentioned. But peace in the palace was like a fragile flame. It burned bright, yet one breath of darkness could snuff it out. Unseen by all, shadows still lingered in the kingdom. Roman's old allies, those who had benefited from his corruption, had not vanished. They watched from the edges of the court, plotting vengeance in silence. To them, Gwen was not a hero. She was the root of their downfall, the slave girl who had undone years of deceit with one act of courage. And one night they decided to erase her. The air was unusually still that evening. The guards outside the king's chamber yawned, unaware of the dark figure that slipped past them like smoke. The assassin's blade gleamed faintly beneath the torchlight, poisoned, silent, deadly. Inside, Lucas sat by the fire, reading old letters, waiting for Gwen. She had gone to bring him fresh tea from the kitchen, a habit she refused to let go of despite his protests. He smiled at the thought of her gentle stubbornness. But the smile faded when the candle flickered. A faint creak echoed in the corridor. "Who's there?" he called. No answer. The door inched open, and before Lucas could rise, Gwen appeared, her hands holding a tray. "I thought you might still be awake," she began softly. Then she saw the shadow move behind him. "Lucas!" she screamed. Time froze. The assassin lunged. Gwen dropped the tray and threw herself forward, her body colliding with the intruders just as the blade flashed. The knife cut across her side before clattering to the floor. She fell with a cry, blood blooming through her dress. Lucas's roar shook the chamber. He tackled the assassin, fury like fire in his eyes. The guards burst in, blades drawn, seizing the intruder. Lucas didn't even look up. He was already on his knees, cradling Gwen in his arms. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, Gwen, stay with me." Her breathing was shallow. "I told you, you shouldn't wait for tea at this hour." She tried to joke weakly, but her words trembled. "Don't speak," he said, his hand pressing against the wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. "You're going to be fine. You have to be." The royal physician rushed in, followed by Lady Maren and Claudia, both pale with fear. The chamber turned into chaos, but Lucas never left her side. Through the long, endless night, he held her hand, whispering her name over and over as the healers worked. When dawn finally came, Gwen's breathing steadied, but she remained unconscious. Her face was pale, her lashes still. Lucas sat by her bedside, his crown forgotten, his robe stained with her blood. He hadn't slept. His eyes were red from tears he refused to shed before anyone else. Lady Maren placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She'll live," she said softly. "She's strong, stronger than any of us realized." He nodded, his voice hoarse. "I thought I understood love, Maren, but it wasn't until I almost lost her that I realized. She's the reason my heart still beats." For days, Lucas never left the chamber. He fed her with his own hands when she stirred, spoke to her even when she could not answer. Word spread through the palace, the king's devotion to the slave girl who had once defied the crown, and now saved him again. The nobles, once scornful, began to whisper a new kind of story. Not one of shame, but of respect. Of a girl who risked everything, not for power, but for love. And somewhere between her labored breaths and the king's whispered prayers, the kingdom began to change its heart. When Gwen finally awoke, the room was filled with morning light. The gentle warmth of dawn touched her face, and the faint chirping of birds outside reminded her she was alive. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, only that she felt weak, her body wrapped in soft linen. Then she turned and saw him. King Lucas sat beside her, his eyes heavy from sleepless nights. The relief that flooded his face when her eyes opened was almost painful to see. "You're awake," he whispered, his voice trembling. Gwen tried to sit up, but pain shot through her side. He was immediately by her, supporting her with careful hands. "Easy," he murmured. "You've been through enough." She blinked, confusion clouding her gaze. "What happened?" "You saved my life again," he said softly. "An assassin came for me. You stopped him, and nearly died because of it." His voice broke. "I will never forget what you've done, Gwen. Never." Her lips trembled as she looked at him. "You shouldn't have stayed here all this time. The kingdom, I don't care about the kingdom right now." He interrupted gently. "Only you." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly looked away. "You can't say that, my king. People are already talking. You owe them strength, not affection for a slave." Lucas's eyes darkened with resolve. "Then I will give them both." He rose from his chair and walked to the window, staring out at the golden horizon. "You once told me power is beautiful only when it protects. I finally understand what you meant. You've protected this kingdom more than anyone here, and it's time the world knew who you truly are." Before Gwen could speak, he turned to her. "Tomorrow, before the council, I will declare you free." Her heart stopped. "No, you can't." "I can," he said firmly. "And I will. You've lived all your life behind chains that weren't yours to bear. It ends now." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she couldn't find the words to argue. There was something in his voice that made her believe him, something that made her heart ache. The next morning, the great council hall was filled to the brim. Nobles, elders, and courtiers gathered, whispering among themselves. Rumors had spread that the king was going to make a shocking announcement. When Lucas entered, the room fell silent. Gwen followed behind him, dressed in a simple white gown that the court lady had prepared. Her steps were unsure, but her chin was lifted high. "Members of the council," Lucas began, his voice echoing through the hall. "You all know Gwen, the Omega who once stood accused of treason and witchcraft." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gwen lowered her gaze, her hands trembling slightly. Lucas continued, his tone steady and strong. "That same woman saved this kingdom not once but twice. When betrayal struck our throne, she chose truth over fear, and when death came for me again, she stood between the blade and her king." Lady Marin bowed her head proudly. Others shifted uncomfortably. Lucas's voice rose, filled with conviction. "For too long we have judged worth by birth, but greatness does not begin in bloodlines, it begins in the heart. Gwen has proven that courage, loyalty, and love can come from even the humblest soul. And so I decree before the council and before the spirits of our ancestors." He turned toward her, eyes unwavering. "Gwen is free. From this day forth she shall walk this palace not as a slave, but as a free woman of the Alpha Kingdom." Gasps filled the air. A noble lord stepped forward, his voice trembling with outrage. "Your Majesty, you break centuries of law. She was born a slave." Lucas's reply was calm, but his tone carried iron. "Then let the laws bend before justice. The state of one's birth should never chain the worth of their soul." Silence fell. No one dared to speak again. Then, in front of the entire court, Lucas reached out his hand. "Gwen," he said softly but clearly, "from today, you stand beside me, not behind me." Her eyes widened as she looked up at him. For a moment, the world disappeared. The nobles, the laws, the fear. All that existed was his hand, his voice, and the warmth in his gaze. With trembling fingers, she took his hand. The hall erupted with murmurs, some in anger, others in awe. But Lucas didn't care. He stood tall, his hand still holding hers. In that moment, something changed, not just for Gwen, but for the entire kingdom. The barrier between royalty and the lowborn had cracked. As they stood before the council, side by side, Gwen realized this was more than a promise. It was a declaration, a vow written not in ink or stone, but in courage and love. The palace is bathed in gold light. Bells ring from the highest towers, echoing across the kingdom. The courtyard glows with torches as nobles, guards, and villagers gather, each waiting to witness history being written before their eyes. The slave girl who once swept the king's halls now walks through them in silver silk, her head held high though her heart trembles in disbelief. Lady Marin, dressed in emerald robes, smiles softly as Gwen passes. "Hold your head up, child," she whispers. "You're not stepping into a dream, you're walking into destiny." Gwen nods, her hands shaking as she holds the white lilies Claudia pressed into them that morning. Somewhere in the crowd, her mother stands, tears glistening on her cheeks. For years she prayed that her daughter would find freedom. Today, that prayer has become more than freedom. It has become glory. King Lucas stands at the end of the hall, dressed not in his usual crimson armor but in royal white, symbolizing renewal. His gaze never leaves Gwen. Every step she takes reminds him of the day she shouted, "He is not dead," saving not only his life but his soul. The priestess raises her staff, silencing the murmuring crowd. "Let it be written," she says solemnly, "that love, not birth, determines worth. Let it be known that courage, not blood, defines royalty." Lucas takes Gwen's trembling hand. "Gwen," he says, his voice deep and steady, "you taught me what it means to be alive. You saw me when the world thought me gone. You gave me light when I was buried in darkness." Gwen's eyes glisten. "My king, I only did what my heart could not refuse. I saw the man, not the crown, and the man was worth saving." The crowd stirs. Some nobles whisper, frowning. A few, humbled by her words, lower their heads. Lady Marin steps forward, kneeling first in respect, setting an example. Slowly others follow. Lucas turns to the priestess. "Then before the kingdom, and before the spirits who guide us, I declare Gwen my Luna and queen." The priestess nods and lifts the ancient wolf emblem. "Then seal your bond under the moon's gaze." Lucas steps closer, his breath warm against Gwen's neck. The hall falls utterly silent. When his teeth gently pierce the tender skin at the base of her neck, a shiver of light sweeps through the room. Gwen gasps as the wolf bond ignites, a glowing mark spreading across her skin, shaped like a silver crescent. Their wolves stir within them, howling as one for the first time. The bond seals not only their love, but their souls. A ripple of power surges through the hall, making even the strongest warriors bow their heads. The priestess lowers her staff. "It is done. The moon has accepted your bond. Rise, Queen Gwen, crowned not by gold, but by love that defied the walls of blood and class." As the glow fades, Lucas lifts his mark to show the crowd the same crescent on his neck, proof that the bond is mutual, sacred, and eternal. A thunder of cheers erupts outside the hall. The people, who once called her slave, now cry her name in joy. "Long live Queen Gwen." Tears stream down her face as she turns to the crowd. In that moment, she remembers the nights she slept hungry, the lashes, the loneliness, and now, she stands beside the king, not behind him. And as the sun breaks through the clouds, shining upon her silver gown, Gwen realizes something she never dared to dream. Love did not only set her free. It crowned her, bound her, and made her one with the king's heart and soul. Peace settled over the Alpha Kingdom like dawn after a long storm. The palace that once echoed with whispers and betrayal now pulsed with laughter and music. The once fearful servants now walked with their heads high, their chains broken, not just from their wrists, but from their hearts. Queen Gwen had changed everything. Her first decree was mercy. The slaves were freed, the lowborns given work, pay, and voice. She turned the palace dungeon into schools for the servants' children, and the old training halls into healing centers. "A kingdom is only as strong as its weakest," she told the council, "and I will not reign over the broken." Many nobles resisted at first, but the people adored her. Villagers began calling her the Omega Queen not as an insult but as a title of honor. Songs were written about her courage, and the night she stood before the king's coffin shouting, "He is not dead," became the tale mothers told their children when teaching them about faith, bravery, and hope. King Lucas watched her from afar sometimes, wondering how such gentleness could wield such strength. He often found her sitting beneath the old willow in the royal garden, feeding birds or tending to the herbs she once used in secret. "You still heal even when you rule," he'd say with a smile. And she'd answer softly, "A queen must remember what pain feels like, or she'll forget how to love. Their bond, sealed by the wolf mark, grew stronger each day. When they shifted beneath the moon, their wolves ran side by side, silver and white, symbols of unity between two worlds that once stood apart. The moon goddess herself was said to have smiled upon their union, for it reminded her that fate can be rewritten when love is pure. Years passed. The kingdom prospered. Children born in the new era never knew the cruelty of rank or the sting of a whip. They only knew the tale of the girl who spoke truth when all others stayed silent. And every year, on the day the king was meant to be buried, the palace held a celebration, not of death, but of rebirth. The people would gather in the courtyard, releasing lanterns into the sky. Each lantern carried a message. Let no voice be silenced. One evening, as the moon bathed the gardens in silver light, Gwen and Lucas walked hand in hand through the same path where they had first spoken alone. The air smelled of jasmine. The fountain sang softly. Lucas stopped and looked into her eyes. Do you ever regret it? He asked. That day you stood before everyone, risking your life for me? Gwen smiled, her voice calm and full of warmth. I didn't save a king that day, she said. I saved a man worth saving. He touched the mark on her neck, glowing faintly under the moon. And I found a queen worth living for. They kissed, slow, deep, eternal. Around them, the night wind carried the howls of wolves across the valley, a melody of loyalty and love. As they turned to gaze upon their kingdom, the stars above seemed to form the shape of two wolves running together, the Alpha and the Omega, bound forever by destiny. And so the story lived on through generations, of the slave who stopped a king's burial, of the voice that defied death, of the Omega who became a queen, and the love that changed a kingdom forever. The end. Thank you for running with me through every moonlit night, every stolen glance, every heart-stopping twist of Gwen and Lucas's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a comment below. Tell me your favorite scene, your favorite character, and what moment made your heart race the most. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next love story we create together under the moonlight. You are the reason these stories live, breathe, and shine. Until the next one, stay wild, stay brave, and keep howling at the moon.